So in our first day of lesson 10.4, we're going to be looking at something that's brand new to all of you, unless you've gotten to it on the Alex program, or maybe you saw it on the NWEA that we took. So as we get into this, I want to start with looking at box plots. Then we can do the interquartile range and things like that that are in the book. We need to understand what a box plot is, what the purpose of it is, and how it is that we create it. So I have a handout for you, and what I want to do is walk through where all of those things come from, what all the 7 steps are when it comes to a box plot. So the first few moments here, I just want you following along and looking at where everything's coming from, looking at the steps that's on it, that's on the screen, as well as on your handout. And then we will practice 3 of them together. I'll have you do the 4th one on your own and see how you do. Then you can have your short assignment. So as we're going through these first few slides, once again, I just want you to follow along. I want you to look at the steps as I'm describing them, and I'm going to show you where the overall image comes from on your half sheet handout, and that would be great for you to keep a hold of. So notice in the red underneath the box plot, it says that we're dividing our data set into 4 groupings. So notice that you have some words up there like quartile, and once again, QUA means a grouping of 4. Right? That's how we get the word cuatro in the Spanish language. So when I look at QUA, I'm putting my data set into 4 equal groups. And that has to start by putting all of them in order from least to greatest. Why? Because I need to start with finding the median, the middle number of the entire group. And if they're not in order from least to greatest, that becomes quite a challenge. So we always take our data set, put them in order from least to greatest. Once I do that, then I work on finding the median. The median, once again, means middle. And so I'm going to cross them off from left to right in groups of 2. If I have an odd number of data set, then I know that the middle number that I circle is going to be my median. However, if it's even, such as this, then I have to find the average or the middle of the 2 numbers that I circle. Basically, I add them together, divide by 2. Then I'm going to put a tally mark up above the number line that I'm given for each of my box plot areas, and that's going to be my first marking of my overall box plot. So first I start by crossing them off left and right in groups of 2 until I'm left with my center numbers. This example, it's an even number of data sets, so I know that I have to add them together and divide by 2, also known as finding what's in the middle of them or averaging them. So when I find the actual median of my group, then I have 3 plus 4, which is 7. And when I divide 7 by 2, well, 2 will go into 7 3 times, which gives me a remainder of 1. Now I'm going to find my decimal numbers, or you could do it as a fraction and get 3 and 1/2. Or when I do a decimal, I raise my decimal, add a 0, bring it down, and 2 will go into 10 5 times. Either way, I'm going to find that 3.5 or 3.5 is my median of this overall group. So where the 3.5 would be, I'm going to make this tally mark, and this is going to be the first mark of my box plot. Notice I'm not putting it over the line, I'm putting it on top of the line, floating up there in the space. Once I've done that, then hopefully I can see where I'm starting to build those 4 equal groups. So when I look at all of the numbers from 0 to 8 in order, what I've done is I've now divided them into 2 equal groups. So my next step is to focus in on the lower. So I've divided the group in half, and now I'm going to divide the first half in half. I'm going to find the middle, right? So you will see that on step 3, we're finding the lower quartile. Once again, that means 4. So we're dividing it into 4 equal groups. Well, I'm going to take my first half and divide it into 2 of them. The way I do that is I find the middle of the first half. When I say the middle of the first half, that means I have to go everything to the left of the median. Now, once again, if I've circled a data from my data set, then I wouldn't count that one. In this case, I haven't circled any of my data sets because I had to find the middle of 2 of them. So I'm going to include everything to the left. So we're going to do it just like we do median, but we're only going to use half of the numbers. So we're going to cross them off in pairings on left and right until I get to the middle. In this one, now I have 2 of them once again. Hopefully you know that that's going to be 1.5 or 1.5, but let's say you don't, and that's okay. Or you do, let's prove it. So we're going to add 1 and 2 together, which gives us 3. And then we're going to divide it by 2, because once again, we're finding the middle of two numbers. And 2 goes into 3 once. I know that I have to raise my decimal and bring down a 0, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. So we found out that it is 1.5 or 1.5. So, as it says at the end of step 3, we're going to make a tally mark. So I'm going to make a tally mark up above the number line to indicate where my lower quartile would be. My lower quartile is 1.5 or 1.5, so it's going to be right between the 1 and the 2. So I've made my second line of my box plot. Now, when I look back over at my group of information, what I've done, if I would indicate where that middle number is, hopefully I'm beginning to see why it's called finding my quartiles, because we just took our first half of our data and split it in half. That's going to be 2 pieces. When I split the next half, I'm going to have 2 more pieces. So now that I have my data divided in half and that half divided in half. So now I have 2 quarters and then the other half. So now that I'm looking at it, I'm going to find the median of the upper numbers. Once again, as I'm doing that, I'm finding my upper quartile mark that's going to divide that upper half into 2 pieces. But when I'm doing that, I want to use everything to the right of the median for the data set. And that means if I have circled a piece of my data, I won't include it. But if I have it, such as this example, I will include everything to the right of it. So that means I have to include the 4 as I'm going through and finding the median of the upper half. I've crossed them off, same process as we have been doing. I circle the 2 that are left. Now I add and divide by 2. Hopefully you know that that's going to be 6.5 or 6.5, but mathematically we want to prove that that's going to be my upper quartile mark. So 6 plus 7 is 13. And then when I divide 13 by 2, I do find out that it's going to be 6.5 or 6.5. So I have to make a tally mark as step 4 says, and I have to know where that would belong. Well, 6.5 is more than 6, less than 7, so it has to go right in the middle of the 6 and the 7. Now I have my third mark, and I want to look at what I just did. So with that third mark, if I would add it to that list of data over there to the right, hopefully I can see that I have indeed divided that into 4 equal groups. Each one is a quarter of the group. So hopefully I can understand why we have 3 different quartile Q1, Q2, Q3 marks, because those are the marks that divide them into my different groupings. So I have my lower quartile, then I have my median or my middle quartile or my quartile 2, and then I have my upper quartile. But now I want to do step 5, and step 5 tells me now I'm going to take those 3 tally marks and I'm going to box them in. And that one's really easy. I'm going to connect my top of my 3 lines, and then I'm going to connect the bottom of my 3 lines. And now I have my box for my box plots. That takes me to my last 2 steps of plotting my box plots. So my last 2 steps then, as I'm looking at it, is called the whiskers. That's why it's sometimes called a box and whiskers plot. I just call it a box plot because that's what I've always known it as. But the whiskers come from my being able to identify as this image says, the maximum and the minimum, or the least and the greatest. And if I have them in order from least to greatest, that makes my job a lot easier. So my first whisker on the left is going to go from my lower quartile all the way down to my smallest number in my data set. So when I look at that, that's a 0. So I'm going to put a tally mark where the 0 is, and then I'm just going to connect it. That makes the whisker to the box itself. Then on step 7, I do the same thing, but I'm looking for my upper whisker, and that is going to take me to my highest number or my largest piece of data. That's an 8 in this data set. So I make my tally mark above the 8, I connect it to the box. So I've created my entire box plot showing all of my data, that my data is divided into 4 equal groups when it comes to the pieces, and then I can focus in when I get to my next lesson on what I can interpret from the box plot itself. All right, so now we're going to start working together and following along. And my first step is on problem 1 to put them in order from least to greatest. So when you do that, then once again, I would strongly suggest that you cross them off after you've written them down. So you have 40, 42, 46, 48, 51, 55, 58, 66, 67, and then 68. Oh, and then 69, excuse me. So once again, if I go too fast, just pause the video so you can keep up with me. But I want you working through these with me step by step so you understand what the 7 steps to a box plot are. So my first thing is I'm going to find the median of my overall data. So notice I'm crossing off from left to right in groups of 2. And on this one, I have the middle number in my data set. So that's going to make some of my work easier as we go along. But since I found my median, then I want to be able to mark it once again above my number line. Don't write it right on the number line because then my lines get confusing as to what I've marked. And notice that I don't have a 55 tick mark on my number line. Well, a lot of times you won't. A lot of times they'll be in different groupings or intervals, as we talked previously in Unit 10. So we just have to know where 55 would be, and we make our tick mark. My second step, I look at everything to the left of the median. Now this one's different than the example for the image handout, because this one I have circled the median. And since that's a piece of my data, I'm not going to include it to find the median of the lower quartile area. So I'm only going to use the 40 through the 51. So I go and I cross them out in groups of 2 from left to right, which allows me to have a middle number, which makes my life once again easier because I don't have to do the adding and dividing by 2. So I'm seeing that my lower quartile is 46. So I go down right above the 46 and I make my tick mark for my lower quartile range. Then we got to do my next step, which is finding the middle of the right side of the data set. So now when I'm finding my upper quartile, I look at everything to the right of my median. Once again, I've circled a piece of my data, so I'm going to ignore it and I'm going to count everything just to the right of it. When I do that, then I'm crossing off in groups of 2 until I am left with something in the middle, either 2 numbers that I have to add and divide by 2, or just the one by itself. So I can see that my upper quartile tally mark is going to be where the 67 would be. Once again, I don't have a tally mark for 67, so I just have to understand that 67 comes between 66 and 68. What was the next step? Well, step 5 is one of the easiest ones. I'm just going to box it in. So I'm going to connect my upper quartile, my lower quartile, and my median all inside of a box. Then I look for my whiskers. So my whiskers are once again my lowest number and my highest number. So wherever my lowest number is on my number line, I'm going to make a tally mark above it. So I locate the 40 and I make a tally mark and then I connect it with the whisker to the box itself. Then I look for my highest number, and in my data set, my highest number is 69, which would be right between the 68 and 70. So I'm going to make my tally mark and connect it to my box. So now I have my box and whiskers, or my box plot, with all of my data indicated, which would be put into 4 equal groupings. So let's look at data set 2. Now, when I count all those, I see I have an even number of data. So this is going to be more like the handout image that I gave you, where I have to do some math to find my median and my quartiles. But I always have to start with step 1, and that's putting them in order from least to greatest. So I have 1, 5, 8, 10, 11, 12, 14, 17, 19, 20, 22, 23. Now, once again, I know that was fast, so you can slow down this video as often as you need to and review it, but we always have to start by putting them in order from least to greatest. Then I work from the outside in until I find my middle number, or in this case, my middle 2 numbers. Hopefully you can tell that the median is going to be 13. It's going to be 13 because in my counting numbers, I only have one number between 12 and 14. However, once again, we want to prove it, so we add them together and divide by 2. And when I take 26 and I divide it by 2, I do indeed get 13. Now, once again, when it comes to finding my lower quartile and then my upper quartile, if my median is not in the data set itself, then I have to use everything to the left. Some students get confused on that and they mess themselves up. And if I catch it or you can't figure out where you're getting the wrong answers, then please let me know and I'll show you where you're probably messing up. But just focus in on the idea that the median is not in the data set. So in order to find my lower quartile, I have to use everything to the left of it. So what that means is I'm going to look at from the 1 to the 12, and I'm going to cross them off from the outside in until I'm left with one middle number or 2 that I have to find the middle of. So we finished up step 2 by finding the median. We put our tally mark above the 13. And so now I do step 3 and find my lower quartile using everything to the left of the median. So I go from the 1 and the 12 to the 5 and the 11, and I'm left with 8 and 10. Hopefully you know that's 9, but if you don't, it's okay, because either way, we're going to prove it. We're going to add our 10 and our 8, we get 18. And when I divide 18 by 2, it does indeed tell me that it's 9. So we found that our lower quartile is 9. So I go down to my number line, I make my tally mark above where the 9 is. Then I'm going to go to everything to the right of the median. And once again, the median is not in the data set, so I literally use everything to the right. And I mark off from the outside in until I'm left with one number, or in this case, once again, 2, that I have to add and divide by 2. Now, there isn't a middle counting number, so some of you automatically know that that's going to be 19.5, but if you don't, it's okay, because everyone has to show me where it comes from. So we add 19 to 20 and get 39. Then when I divide 39 by 2, then I'm going to get 2 goes into 3 one time with 1 left over. I have 19, and 2 goes into 19 9 times because that's 18 with 1 left over. Have to remember to have my decimal, bring it up, add a 0, bring it down, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. So we're finding that the middle number is 19.5. So I go down to 19 and a half, halfway between the 19 and 20, and I make my tally mark for my upper quartile. Step 5 tells me to do what? Make my box. So I'm going to box those in. Now I have my box for my box plot. I just have to make my whiskers. And my whiskers, once again, are probably the easiest things about box plots. So the lowest number and the highest number. So I have to make a tally mark where the 1 is, and then connect it all the way over to the box. And then my highest number is 23, so I have to make a tally and then connect it all the way back to the box. So I've created my box plot that shows me all of my data in 4 equal groupings for that particular set of data. We got this? Let's practice one more together before I turn you loose on your own. So on set 3 on the back, then I have a bigger number line because we have bigger numbers, but it's still going to be done the exact same way. We start with step 1, which is putting them in order from least to greatest. So I go from 89 to 92, 93, 94, 99, 100, 107, 111, 119, and then 125. And then I have to find the middle. I mark them off from outside in. Once again, I'm left with 2 numbers. So I'm going to add those together and divide by 2. You may already know what that median is, but it's okay because you still have to show me how you get the median. So when I add those together, I get 199. I divide 199 by 2, and that's going to give me 9, which is 18, remainder of 1. I bring down my 9, so I have 2 going into 19, which is 9, which is 18 again, remainder of 1. Add my decimal and bring it up, add a 0, bring it down, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. So hopefully you could tell that between 99 and 100 is going to be 99.5 or 99 and a half. Now, when I start looking down below on where I'm going to make my tally mark, notice that I'm counting by even numbers. So I can't put it directly in the middle of 98 and 100 because that would be 99. So I have to slide it over closer to the 100, right? Because that's where the 99 and a half or 99.5 would actually be. So now I'm going to look at my lower quartile. And my lower quartile, once again, tells me to use everything to the left of the median. I do not have a median that's in my data set, which is okay. That means that I'm going to just use the 99 and 89 in my first grouping that I cross off. This allows me to just have a number left by itself for my lower quartile, or the middle of the lower half of data. So if I have a 93 as my lower quartile, I'm going to put my tally mark where the 93 would be on my number line. Then I go over to the right side of the median and I look at the data set there. Once again, I have to start with the 100 because my median is not in the data set. So I'm going to cross them off in groups of 2, which leaves me with 111 right in the middle. So my upper quartile is 111. I go down to my number line and I make my tally mark. Step 5, I have my 3 tally marks, I'm going to box it in. Then I end with my whiskers. My lowest number in the data set is 89. So I go where the 89 would be and make a tally mark and then connect it to the box. And then my highest number is 125. I go down to where the 125 would be and make my tally mark, and then I connect it to the box. So now I have my box plot for all of that data, showing the 4 different groupings and where the data would be. Once again, our next lesson in our book is going to be taking our box plots and figuring out what kind of data groupings we have and what this offsetting of these different sections actually means to us. All right, so as I said earlier, that on question 4, I want you to try this on your own. Now listen to me before you get started. I just want you to try. I know this is new for everyone, unless you happen to see it on Alex and you've already gone through those lessons. But I don't feel like it's anything that's too difficult. However, some of you, like me, you do struggle with focus, and maybe you kind of got off and you don't understand exactly what all the steps are. I'm going to make a suggestion to you, which I often have to do even at 51, almost 52 years old. Go back to the very beginning and rewatch the 7 steps alone and truly focus where you're not doing any math, but think about everything I'm saying and look at those 7 steps. Then come back and try this. And then, yes, it will take extra time, but if you lost your focus, then that's the only way you're really going to understand what's being done. I'm not asking once again for perfection. I'm asking for your effort. All I've ever asked. So see if you can come up with the correct answers and then unpause this and see how you did. So hopefully you have a box plot in front of you, and I'm going to go through what you should have done to get to it. And hopefully there was no one that took a shortcut and tried to do it without doing step 1. Doing step 1, putting them in order from least to greatest, is going to make your life so much easier. So hopefully when you put them in order from least to greatest, you made sure you had them all written down and you have them in order from 60 up to 79. Then you went to step 2, and that was finding the median, and you cross them off from the biggest on the right to the smallest on the left in groups of 2 until you're left with a middle. And I gave you a set that had a middle number, so hopefully finding the median was going to be easier for you. So when I see that my median is 70, I go down to my number line, I make my tally mark to indicate where 70 is. That's my first mark of my box plot. Now I'm going to go do my lower quartile, which once again is my step 3. So I'm looking at everything to the left of my median. That means I do not count the 70. So I'm going to cross them off from left to right in groups of 2, and I see that I can take off one group and I'm left with the middle 2. That means I have to add them together and divide by 2. So you had 124, and when you divided 124 by 2, hopefully you got 62. So you went down to your number line and you put a tally mark where your lower quartile of 62 would be. Then you went to your upper quartile, which is step 4 in the process, and we looked at everything to the right of the 70. So we started with crossing off 72 and 79. We had 2 numbers in the middle, and when there's 2 numbers in the middle, then I know I have to add them and divide by 2. So hopefully you added 75 and 78, and you found out that that's 153. And then when you divided that by 2, you got a decimal of 76.5. Now, once again, on my number line, I can see that it's counting by 2s, right? My interval is 2s. So right in the middle of 76 and 78 would be 77. So when I put my tally mark, I have to put my tally mark a little closer to 76 than the halfway mark would be. Now that I have my 3, then hopefully you followed step 5, and that was to make your box. And then you did your final 2 steps, which hopefully are your easiest. You put your lower number, which is 60, you mark it with a tally mark, connect it to make your left-hand whisker, and then you found 79, which is your highest number. You put your tally, connect it to the box to make your right-hand whisker. Is that what yours looks like? Hopefully it does. If yours is way off and you don't understand where your mistake was, please ask us so we can help you. If you get it and you're good to go, then once again, you have 3 questions. There are 3 box plots that I need you to create. You can turn that in before you head home, and then you don't have to worry about any homework tonight.